What's up, fellow Autism? I know it's been a minute, but I got a new toy. But is it worth the $300? Let's find out. So longtime viewers might know that I play a lot of retro games here on ENunnGaming, and for those I use the open source scan converter, and this is an excellent device to get into, hardware scaling and stuff like that. I use this since 2018 and it has been absolutely wonderful to me. However, lately it's been kind of a needle in my spine, a spine in my back, whatever the fuck that saying is. I don't know. So unfortunately, the OSSC has a couple flaws which just suck. One of them is there is no composite input. You can't input composite through the SCART port or through the component inputs without a special adapter or something like that, like a converter box or something like that. And that was kind of a struggle for me when I shot the plug and play games episode. I had to route my consoles through my DVHS VCR and then take the component output of the VCR to my OSSC, and I had to capture with Amorec TV. Now, it's not a big problem. I thought the quality was fine and all, but it is 240p being mishandled as 480i. And most TVs and scalers misinterpret that signal as 480i, which is not good because one, you're interlacing something that doesn't need to be interlaced. Two, your TV is deinterlacing something that doesn't need to be deinterlaced in the first place, which adds a lot of input lag. And three, the image quality is just kind of subpar. And another flaw is resolution switching, especially with PS1 and N64 games. A lot of games have 480i menus but 240p gameplay and vice versa, which causes capture cards to just go all haywire, and sometimes it causes a lot of problems. Now, I haven't had a huge issue with that because I've never played any games that are reliant on those transitions. But I know it's a problem for a lot of people, and it can make games pretty much unplayable at the worst. Oh, and also for a lot of people, compatibility is hit or miss, especially with consoles like the Super Nintendo, because their OSSC spits out the refresh rate of the console, so capture card compatibility will be hit or miss. However, I haven't had a problem personally with the Live Gamer 4K, at least with the consoles that I have, but I know a lot of people have problems and such. And don't get me wrong, the OSSC is a fantastic product, but I want better. Introducing the RetroTINK-2X. For the low price of $300, your retro gaming experience will become exquisite. So in terms of connections, you have YPVPR component video with the green port acting as a composite input. Thank you, Mike Chi. We have RCA audio, we got S video, HDMI output, shitty micro USB, fuck this connector. And on the side, we have a backwards SCART port. Please focus, thank you. Yeah, it's unfortunate that it's backwards, but apparently I've heard that there's a part shortage of right-way SCART ports, which kind of sucks, but shit happens. But a plus of the SCART port is that you can actually use it as a secondary composite input with this little adapter that you can get for an extra $5. It's very nice, it's very convenient for me because I am lazy, and with my setup, I do not feel like reaching back here and swapping out cables back here, so that's good. So now that I've talked about inputs and outputs and stuff like that, I'm just going to gawk at how good this thing is and showcase some gameplay footage, and also talk about some stuff that kind of pet peeves me, and also just talk about some good features and stuff like that. So just a little note before we get into it, I am using the almost latest experimental firmware 2.59, which adds a lot of extra features and actually is pretty good, and I highly recommend everyone to actually update to that firmware or the actual latest of 2.6, I believe. You can get the experimental firmware by going to the RetroTINK Discord in the description and checking the experimental firmware channel. Then you can flash it with the RetroTINK software. Out of the box, the quality is fantastic given you have the right cables. I'll be noting which cables I use on the bottom left corner of the screen. I'm not going to say this is worse or better than the OSSC in terms of quality because they're pretty damn close, but I'm just wanting a good scaler for everything, especially composite video. I don't have a lot of stuff that outputs composite video other than my plug and play systems, but composite video is probably the best composite video that I've seen personally on a scaler. Although sad to say, the Radica Golden Tee Golf plug and play is kind of unplayable because the image keeps flickering up and down. But apparently this is an issue with Radica plug and plays overall, maybe, which kind of sucks, but it's kind of low priority on the fixed list, so oh well. Now let's talk about output resolutions. The TINK-2X has various output resolutions resolutions. Let's start out with the three 1080p modes. There's Fill, which does a 4x integer scale of 240p or a 2x integer scale of 480p, then scales to fit your display. There's Over, which scales 240p to 5x, then chops off the top and bottom to fill your screen. I'm not personally a fan of this. I like seeing all the information, and I know you don't really see that information on the CRT. I don't care. I do not care. And then there's Under mode, which is a 4x scale, and then that's window box to 1080p. Very sharp, very nice. I'm not a fan. There's also a 1200p mode, which is basically 1080p 5x, but without the crop. Now we can get into the fancy stuff. If you're not running any experimental firmware, the highest resolution that a TINK-5X can support is 1920 by 1440p, a 6x scale of 240p. Compatibility will be hit or miss depending on your capture cards and displays. I'm able to display it and capture it, not that I'd want to, because if you are using at least experimental firmware 2.57, you'll be able to get 2560 by 1440p, which should improve compatibility with your capture cards or displays. It definitely helps out with mine because the AverMedia Live Gamer 4K doesn't actually have a 1920 by 1440p mode, and instead I have to stretch it to 2560 by 1440p and then stretch it back out, which kind of sucks, but I highly recommend using this mode. Just do it. If your TV supports it, use it. Don't even think about 1920 by 1440. Just use 2560. Another cool thing with the 2560 by 1440p modes is that you can actually scale 720p up to 1440p. This is mostly useful for 720p original Xbox games. You can also hook up an Xbox 360 or a PS3 through component, and I was actually quick to judge the PS3's component video output because back then I had really shitty cables and I just wasn't pleased with the component output, but seeing the PS3 run through my HD Retrovision component cables and then through the RetroTINK, it's actually really nice, especially when you go to the interpolation and DeInterlacing settings and changing the vertical filter to smooth. I can't believe I'm saying this. This actually looks really good. I still prefer using HDMI because I just prefer using digital connections whenever available, but honestly, I don't blame you if you use this. If you want to torture yourself, you can upgrade to at least version 2.58 and play around with the 4K 24 hertz mode. It makes me want to vomit, but I mean, if you want to vomit, more power to you. I believe with firmware 2.6, you can actually output 30 hertz at 4K, but that's probably all you're going to get 4K wise, since the TINK, to my knowledge, only is HDMI 1.4, and that is limited to up to 4K at 30 hertz. Then there's some more resolutions that are added to ensure that it works on every display out there. 720p, 480p/576p depending on the region, 540p for some reason, and it has a handy 240p pass-through. The only use case that I can think of is that you can use it on a CRT at native resolution through like HDMI to component adapters, but it's kind of useless everywhere else. Let's talk about some fancy schmancy stuff. Let's head into the horizontal sampling page. By default, the preset is set to generic 4:3, which just outputs the same or close to the same aspect ratio that a CRT would show. It's also very oversampled, so you'll have slight, and I mean slight, blurring on the horizontal axis. But are you really gonna notice it? Probably not. You can change the preset to generic 16:9 to stretch the image to fill your screen. Only use it for widescreen games, will ya? You can also fiddle around with the various other presets for different consoles. If you match it up just right, you can get a very crisp output at the cost of a slightly stretched aspect ratio. You can compensate for this by going into the scaling cropping page and changing the V size until this number is at 1.0. That'll fix the aspect ratio at the cost of some image being chopped off at the top and bottom depending on your setting. And personally, I am not a fan of this. And that's why for 512 and 384 pixel wide PS1 games, I have it set to generic 4:3. And yes, I know you won't be able to see that lost image on a CRT, but I do not care. For 320 pixel wide PS1 games, I actually don't even bother with changing the vertical size. I prefer the aspect ratio looking like this because this was the aspect ratio that I played at when I used my OSSC. Also, by default, it's just way too skinny for my tastes. For 256 pixel wide PS1 games, I actually do use the vertical scale. Most PS1 games that I played that are 256 pixels wide don't even have any information on the top and bottom. It's just black. For Dreamcast games, I use the DTV 858 3:2 sampling mode. This is because although the Dreamcast outputs at 720 by 480, most if not all Dreamcast games actually output at 640 by 480. This means black bars on the sides, and the aspect ratio is too skinny. Setting it to DTV 858 3x2 corrects the aspect ratio and gives me an ultra sharp image. I highly recommend taking advantage of this for Dreamcast games, but please keep in mind this will only be available if you're outputting 2560 by 1440. Okay, but what about N64? Well, I got a new N64 RGB with D-Blur, but the installer kind of fucked up the install, so I had to send it back, and now I'm still waiting for my N64. For Wii, PS2, GameCube, and Xbox, I just leave it to generic and just leave it alone. You know, I don't blame anyone for sticking with generic. It's certainly the easiest and less stressful option. It won't be as sharp as correct sampling modes, but I mean, are you really gonna notice? Now here's something that the Tink can really shine at. DeInterlacing. This is mostly for PS2 games because most games output 480i. The OSSC has a pretty bad deinterlacer. It's called Bob, and the problem with Bob is that it's incredibly flickery. It's fast, it's zero lag, but it just looks like ass. I personally do not mind playing with Bob deinterlacing on, but for capturing, I'd actually set the OSSC to pass-through mode and then use Emirec to record a 480i video. And then I'd use QTGMC through Avisynth to deinterlace it, which outshines Bob in every single way. However, the RetroTINK-2X has its own motion adaptive deinterlacing, and I will admit, it is the best deinterlacer I have seen on a scaler so far. However, I am spoiled by QTGMC. I like QTGMC. It is a fantastic deinterlacer, and no hardware deinterlacer is ever going to beat a software deinterlacer. QTGMC destroys the RetroTINK-2X hands down in deinterlacing. But I mean, will most people even care about that? Probably not. The deinterlacing is really good on the RetroTINK-2X, but there's a lot of combing artifacts, and there are times where I think, do I have motion adaptive enabled? And speaking of enabling, there's a lot of deinterlacing options the RetroTINK-5 can do. There's Blend, which makes everything blurry, Weave, which adds a lot of combing artifacts, Bob, which is the deinterlacer we all know and hate, a smoother form of Bob, and then the motion adaptive deinterlacer. Personally, just leave it at motion adaptive. Don't even bother changing it. Just leave it at motion adaptive. No deinterlacer is perfect. I can understand that. I just wish it was a little better. Honestly, this is my opinion, but again, I said it myself. I am spoiled by QTGMC. And another pet peeve of mine, unfortunately, there is no interlace pass-through on the RetroTINK-2X, so I cannot take advantage of QTGMC, which really sucks. Mike Cheese said it would probably take a whole rework of the firmware or something like that, which kind of sucks, but I mean, if it's low priority, I can completely understand that. But now that I've gotten my RetroTINK-5, I'm probably not going to be using my OSSC anymore, mainly because I'm just lazy and don't want to get it out every time I want to record a PS2 game. But please, Mike, please add interlace pass-through. It'd be really helpful. Please, 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 please. I just made a discovery. Actually, I didn't discover it, but this guy did, but you know, whatever. If you set your RetroTINK to output 480p, then change the deinterlacer to Weave, and then capture 1440 by 480, 2997 frames a second in something like Emirec, you can actually deinterlace with QTGMC. That is fan-fucking-tastic. But the problem is you still have to deal with Weave deinterlacing while you're playing. And this makes me wish even more for a 480i pass-through so I don't have to deal with this shit. Mike, I am begging you, please. Alright, so I think there's one more thing that I would like to talk about, and that is resolution switching. As I said in the beginning of the video, when the game changes resolution, your capture card or your TV will just go all apeshit. Say goodbye with that with the RetroTINK-2X. If you head into the HDMI settings, by default, VSync is set to triple buffer. Keep this on. This will guarantee perfect transitions from 240p to 480i or 480i to 480p and so on. I am very happy that I don't have to worry about my capture card dropping out whenever a resolution change happens. But because 2560 by 1440p outputs at 30 Hz when there's no signal, I do have to kind of deal with that whenever I boot my console up, or if I change resolutions from, say, 480p to 720p, especially with the original Xbox, because 480p is 59.94 Hz, and 720p is 60 Hz even. There's also frame lock mode, which outputs the same refresh rate as the console. I wouldn't worry about this too much. Just leave it at triple buffer. There's maybe an extra quarter, an eighth, a 16th, I don't know. The input lag is extremely low, so just keep it in triple buffer. And you know, some people might be wondering, since it is so good at handling resolution switches, how good is it with VHS? I would never use the RetroTINK-5 for VHS tapes, and the reason being is because there is no interlace pass-through. However, for you might want to consider it. Now here's some tapes being played back through my main VCR, which is the JVC SR MV45. It's a really high-end and professional VCR with a time-based corrector in it, and I don't expect everyone to have a VCR like this. I know these can get really expensive. I sold both my kidneys for mine, but the better the VCR, the better the quality you can get out of those tapes, so just keep that in mind. Just keep in mind, if your tape and signal quality is shit, it ain't gonna work wonders. But to be fair, the quality is pretty nice. Again, not everyone's gonna have a really high-end VCR like mine, so let's bring out the old Quasar VHQ-950. And honestly, it's very stable. It's not dropping anything to my knowledge. However, depending on your tape, it's gonna be really haywire. So personally, if you have problems with your tapes, just get yourself a Panasonic DMR ES15 and just be done with it. I am surprised at how stable it is. Even if I fuck up the tracking or have a really bad tape, it's actually really good. Very stable. You might want to actually consider this, and you might be able to take advantage of QTGMC like I mentioned a few minutes ago. I'm not gonna bother recapping with Weave and stuff like that, but you might want to consider that. By the way, you can check out my VHS captures on my other channels, ENunn and ENunn2. Is that all to talk about? I guess so. The final question is it worth the $300? Yes, 100% yes. You will not be disappointed with this scaler. It is excellent, it's sharp, it's just it's gorgeous, it's stable, it's just fantastic. But of course, if you can't afford $300, there's always the OSSC, which is still a fantastic device, and I highly recommend that too. But just keep in mind, you know, you're gonna have to deal with Bob DeInterlacing, poor resolution changes, no composite or S video and stuff like that. But I mean, if you're just happy, just use it. I have a link to where you can buy the RetroTINK-5X in the description, plus the RetroTINK Discord server, and all the videos that I had to grab off YouTube. They will all be in the description, so you can watch the original videos and support these guys, because they are very nice and very amazing and cool and amazing content creators and amazing and cool and stuff like that and cool. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I didn't. If you did, like this video, and if you're new, subscribe and hit the bell for every single future video that'll probably be out in another 5 years, because I have a life unlike you. If you're returning to the channel, thank you for being patient with me. I'm working 5 days a week now, so it's just kind of all over the place. Although I am really happy with my job and happy with what I'm doing and stuff like that. So thank you for being patient with me. Hopefully there may be a video sometime soon. I don't know. I just have not had motivation because, well, I am working 5 days a week. So please be patient with me. Maybe I'll upload something in the future. And yeah, thank you for watching. I'll see you soon, I guess. Bye.